Welcome back to Learn Your Stripes. I'm Ryan Guillory.
And I'm Michael Moran. And with this episode, we're going to get right into it by discussing our play from our previous episode. So B40 intercepts a pass on Team B's 4-yard line. His momentum is taking him into the end zone where he fumbles the ball on the 1-yard line. And this is a two-parter. B40, the fumbler, recovers the fumble in the end zone, or the other option is B45, a teammate of the fumbler, recovers the fumble in the end zone. And so we asked you all what the outcome would be. And so in either scenario, it's a safety. Either way, because the ball came out and was fumbled in the field of play, then subsequently went in the end zone, the momentum rule here does not apply.
Right. Yeah, that's an important one to keep the momentum rule in mind in terms of what it encompasses and what the actual, whether it's the receiver, the interceptor, whomever, what their responsibilities are in order to get that benefit of the momentum rule. So it's a good illustration there of what we have to deal with. This week, we're going to do something that synthesizes probably a few episodes that we've had so far and some that'll come into the future. It's going to deal with timing. Specifically, we're going to talk about rules and mechanics that we all need to keep in mind in the last 2 minutes of a half. Of course, as normal, we're going to start with the high school level. Again, we've discussed some of these rules in other contexts, but when we get to the end of the half, it's important that everyone on our crew is mindful of the circumstances that could extend the half for an untimed down. At the high school level, that rule is Rule 333, fairly simple to remember there.
Easy enough, yeah.
And that tells us when a period gets extended for an untimed down, and that's within a few specific circumstances. Number one, there's a live ball foul by either team, and that penalty is accepted, except for fouls that are listed in the next rule, 334B. So we have a live ball foul where the penalty is accepted. We've got a double foul. We've got an inadvertent whistle. Or if a touchdown was scored, then we'll attempt to try if it would affect the outcome of the game or playoff qualifying. Otherwise, we wouldn't attempt to try. Now, the next rule, Rule 334, tells us when a period is not extended by an untimed down, if one of the following occurs during a down when time expires. If there's a defensive foul during a made field goal or try, and the offended team takes the results of the play with enforcement of the penalty from the succeeding spot. So think through those personal fouls, those 15-yard penalties that could carry over to the kickoff after a score. Or if there's a foul by either team and the penalty is accepted for unsportsmanlike fouls, non-player fouls, fouls that specify a loss of down, fouls enforced on a subsequent kickoff, or fouls for which enforcement by rule result in a safety. Now, it's important to remember that a score is canceled in the event of an accepted penalty that specifies a loss of down. So those are the basic scenarios where we either do extend a period or don't extend a period at the high school level. Michael, we talked about this a little bit last week. Let's talk about that scenario and that rule that gives an offended team the option to do some different things with the clock.
Yeah, sure. And I think this is a good episode to highlight. I think, Ryan, you and I think we might have to play last year. I don't remember. I think the important thing here is to talk about it's okay to slow down, especially when you have a score at the end of a half or a foul. And we had a play last year. I believe we had a score and a foul. I think it was the end of the first half, and it was a 45-yard pass, something deep. And I recall, I think you and I and our back judge are all down, towards the goal line, and we've got touchdown going up, and then we look back, and either our referee or umpire had a flag for a hold, and so then you have to slow everything down because hey, it's the end of the half. Maybe teams are starting to jog off, or maybe somebody's sending a PAT field goal unit on, so it's okay to stop, explain to the coaches what's going on there. And I think we had to decline the foul, and then we went to halftime. I think is what we did.
No, so I know the one you're talking about there. So it was a long pass. I think you're right, 45, 50 yards, something like that. So so we were hauling it down there to the goal line. We get to the goal line, turn back, see the foul, and they're kind of milling around in the middle of the field. There was an offensive hold. So the defense, had they declined it, then the offense's touchdown would have stood. So they had to accept the foul. Right. So by accepting the foul, then obviously we had to extend it for an untimed down.
That's right.
So the hold was enforced. The teams were leaving the field at that point. So you and I had to wrangle our teams back on the field for another attempt. They did not score on that one. So it was a fairly significant foul. But it was, we've talked about it before, being ready from the first play of the game. that was going into the half at our first game of the season.
Yeah.
Week one, we got hit with this various scenarios. So this is one of those, you have to know this from the start, from week one, week zero, if you're working the scrimmage, although you're not going to have really these kind of scenarios in a scripted scrimmage, but you have to know these all year long because they do happen and they can happen to you early on, and you've better figure out how to deal with it. And Michael and I, fortunately, we kept this in mind and got things under control.
Well, just a friendly reminder, if you haven't started hydrating now, go ahead and hydrate, because this, like Ryan said, it was week one, so it was late August in Indiana, which can be okay, but we had, I think, 3 50-yard sprints there kind of back to back. So start hydrating now, folks, and make sure we're getting in shape. Just a reminder to be mentally and physically prepared for the season, because it's a long one. So, but back to our topic here, we were talking about the clock and enforcing and extending. And so we talked in our last episode, a new rule change in the high school world. It's Rule 347, talks about the offended team and what options they have when it comes to the game clock. So it clarifies that the offended team's game clock options following a foul that was committed with less than 2 minutes remaining in either half. So now any foul that was committed within the last 2 minutes of either half will automatically result in the offended team's option to start the game clock on the snap. And before this, the offended team was required to accept the penalty in order to do that. That doesn't matter anymore. So once a foul happens, they can still decline the penalty, and then they still have the option for the clock.
Right. So it's just it's a slightly different change to the rule, but it is something we're going to keep in mind so the coaches know their options. They don't have to accept the penalty to get that benefit of stopping the clock. So just a different rule that everybody on the crew needs to know this year. Now, those are the basic rules at the high school level, and we'll talk in a minute about the college rules. There's both some similarities and some additions at the college level in the last 2 minutes. But why don't we talk about some either, mechanics or helpful tips that we've learned over the years, both from our crew and from other officials, of things to keep in mind as we get near the half. So, Michael, you're looking at the clock. You see 2:05, 2:04, 2:03. What's going through your head at that point?
I'm going to run back to our earlier episode we had when we had Steve Martin on talking about a pre-snap, and this is where your pre-snap can come into play. And I think part of everybody's pre-snap should be looking at the clock, and that's something I've tried to hone in the last couple of years. But like Ryan said, you can't watch the clock go maybe from 2:05 to all the way down to 2, right? That's 5 seconds. But I'll look at a clock and go, okay, it's running, 2:05, 2:04. And now I'm on the field, and just in the back of your mind, you count seconds, right? 3, 2, 1, and right. We all kind of have co-opted some college signals too on our high school crew that we use because we're all comfortable with those. So we use radios, so we might prep each other and say, "Hey, we're getting ready to be under 2." If you don't have radios, a common gesture is both hands out with 2 fingers just pointed to the ground. That's when we use, and I think a lot of times we use both. We just say it over the radio and use a hand signal too, just in case one fails. Hopefully your hands don't fail. Hopefully it's the radio that fails. But that's one thing. So just keep that in your pre-snap, because whether there's 12 minutes on the clock or 10 minutes or 2 minutes, you just need to be aware of the clock in general, what's going on. So not just your back judge.
Right. And along the same lines, the rules that we just talked about in those scenarios that either do or don't extend the half or the period for another play, those are things that everybody on the crew has to be mindful of. We need 5 people working in unison because you can't just rely on your referee to do that, or whoever's calling that foul, to both report the foul, report the enforcement, report the number, and then remember, oh, hey, we need to give the offended team an option. Mm-hmm. In fact, the calling official and the referee are probably going to be pretty busy trying to figure out most of those things. So that's when it helps to have somebody else on the crew come in to give that reminder of either, hey, we would have an untimed down here, or somebody has an option to start the clock on the snap instead of on the wind. And going back to that play that we just discussed that you and I had last year in our first game, it was if I recall correctly, it was a hold that was called by the umpire. So the umpire and the referee are getting together to talk through that while you and I are coming back to try to figure out what the heck's going on. And in that scenario, because we didn't call the foul, we were in a good position to say, slow down, we're going to have an untimed down here. We're going to extend the period for an additional play. So I thought, it was a good scenario. I'm glad that we, I'm glad that we had it in week one because we were ready for that to come up at any point during the season, both then and from any point going forward. But it was also, I thought it was just a really good collaboration from our crew to. Everybody did what they were supposed to, right? We had a good group effort, both to get that extension of the period down, as well as to get the foul enforced correctly by through the referee and the umpire as well.
Absolutely, and I'm really proud of our crew and the way we got together, and slowed down. Like you said, I think it's easy to get in a hurry. That's the most important thing. And one thing I was taught from day one is when you have a foul or a touchdown or whatever, when the clock is stopped, the clock is stopped. So
right.
It feels like 10 minutes. It feels forever. And when you go back and watch film, it's 30 seconds sometimes.
Right.
I think rarely have we had an instance go longer than that, but it does feel like forever, and everybody's watching you, right? Whether you have 100 people watching you or 1,000 people watching you, it feels like forever. But if you get it right, that's what you're prepared for.
Well, especially in that scenario, because you and I were both trying to get our teams to stay on the field instead of going to their locker rooms. So
yeah, I was sucking wind too, so that was my first priority.
So we were, we knew all the attention was on us trying to get all that back in, but we got that one right. But I think you're right there, right? We always hear some variation of the phrase "hustle but don't hurry," and along the same lines. The last 2 minutes of the half are the same as the first 22 minutes of the half, right? I mean, it's football. Downs in the distance don't change. The rules don't change other than what we've just talked about, those specific timing scenarios or the options on a foul by the offended team. But other than that, it's still football. We don't suddenly change to, like overtime procedures or anything like that. It's just like the rest of the half is. So there's not a reason to get antsy all of a sudden with 2 minutes left in the half or once we get under two. It's the same game, officiated the same way, just know that there's a few additional timing rules to keep in mind. And I have to say, perhaps I'm contradicting myself here, but I feel more relaxed in the last 2 minutes, I think, because we go through this routine, right? We give that 2 minute signal. So in addition to my normal pre-snap routine, I've got that in mind. And once we give that signal, I'm starting to think through those. Okay, here's when we would extend a half. Here's when we would give an offended team the option. So I feel like that communication puts us all on the same page, and it helps me to really slow down internally once we hit that point.
And that's good to hear. I think anybody that can get to that level, I think, has really started to begin the master class, if you will, when you can kind of let everything slow down and just kind of come to you. So,
well, and to be fair, that's been a long process because I can say year one, I was definitely not relaxed in the last 2
all
minutes.
Of us for year one, yeah.
Year two, year three, year four, maybe slightly more. But the more we do it, I finally reached the point to where I don't feel that internal anxiety once the clock hits 2 minutes that I used to. And that's not to say I'm going to be perfect in the last 2 minutes, but I at least have that internal portion, that anxiety under control. So hopefully that helps going forward. For me personally, I don't know what it's like for you, Michael.
I would say that year one was absolutely the same. Of just, oh my gosh, what's happening? The world is spinning. Every game gets a little easier, and I think the other thing is we've got to be. When I say in control of the game, I don't mean like we're controlling the game or the outcome, but you have to be in control of the situation, right? If we stay calm, that helps us process. And if we get out of our own heads and we can't maintain or focus or process, things are just going to spiral out of control. So the other thing is to be conscientious too. When we're in that last 2 minutes, timeouts become crucial, right? So be aware of all the situations that are happening. Ryan talked earlier about if you're not calling a foul and you're just kind of, either next to your coach to relay information, or maybe you can provide information to maybe the official who called a foul if they need information, but know the situation, know the down and distance, know where are you, know the time, know the score, right? We talked about it's 2:05, it's 2:04. Well, what happens when that becomes 25 seconds, 24 seconds? Have that in your head. You should know going into that 2 minutes, your coach, how many timeouts they have left in that half.
Right.
1, 2, 3. And something I do is I always, when a coach takes a timeout, I look at them and say, coach, you have 2 left. Coach, you have 1 left. We're on the same page. So be aware of those things and whatever scenarios will happen. Then you can prepare for them, and then you can react to the situation better rather than just try to guess and put it all together.
Right. And part of this is having a football IQ, right? I mean, let's say there's 17 seconds left and they're on the minus 25. So they're 75 yards away from the end zone. They've just run 2 plays up the middle. Chances are they're not going to be looking for a timeout there. Most likely,
Sure.
right? That's the type of scenario where they're trying to run out the clock. Now, if they're on the plus 12, they're 12 yards away from the end zone with 15 seconds left. They've been passing it all over the field, just broke a big run. And that they have say 2 timeouts left. That's one where you're probably going to get a timeout called, whether there or after the next play. So it's just being mindful of that. And I think another point here, Michael, is this is where it's important in pregame to talk to the coaches to make sure they know. We always tell our coaches, look, if you need a timeout in that scenario, you can come out of the box and you can come over to me. If I can't hear you or I can't see you, you can run down, you can yell. That's the one time that, if you need to touch my shoulder or something or touch my arm to get my attention, I'm not flagging you for that one. That's the one acceptable scenario there. Get my attention if you want a timeout in that scenario. And I'm, down by the goal line and the clock's ticking and all. It's okay for you to do that there.
Yeah, you can build that rapport with your coach early on in pregame too, and during the game, right? When you are communicating with your coach, and we're getting a little off topic here, but it kind of relates when you can communicate with your coach and you can have information prepared and answer questions. Your coach will trust you, and that'll make that smoother transition too. If they need a timeout,
right?
Like Ryan said, you can feel the game.
Right. Yeah, I only bring up the getting that cleared away in pregame because if you square that away in pregame, there's no surprises that come up, with 20 seconds left in the half. So, so there's an understanding of what's okay and what's not in that scenario. The last thing that I'll hit here, and we've already sort of talked on this already, but if there's a foul under 2 minutes and you have the potential for the offended team to stop the clock and to start the game clock on the snap or the next snap, if you're not the calling official or the referee who's going through, this is what the foul was, this is the enforcement, this is the number, be prepared to step in, whether that's physically or over the radio, just to make sure everybody knows that the offended team has an option there. If the game was otherwise going to start on the ready, that they'll have the option to start the game on the snap without using a timeout. Now, that's high school. College is pretty similar, but there's a few other things that we have to keep in mind there. Really, the only added complexity that makes it terribly different would be the possibility of a 10-second runoff in certain scenarios. But generally, the rules and the mechanics are going to be similar to high school. So we'll sort of discuss those rules now, and I'll give it back to Michael.
Right. So in the college rule book, same area to be found in Rule 323 specifically talks about extending out periods. And again, when we say extending periods, we're talking specifically, obviously, the second and the fourth quarter for that untimed down. And so very similar to high school, if we have a penalty that is accepted for a live ball foul, we would extend for 1 untimed down. Now, there's a bit of a caveat in that rule that the offended team has an option to not extend it if the foul results in a loss of down. That goes back to a game from a couple of years ago. But that's a little bit more nuanced, a little bit deeper to the college. So we'll kind of just leave that there for a second. The other scenarios, if we have offsetting fouls, so you've got maybe a holding and a DPI, we're going to have an extended untimed down again, or everybody's favorite, the inadvertent whistle. We would obviously have another down there too. So, but we'll just kind of keep doing this over and over again until we don't have that happen. So it's not very common, I think, to have untimed downs. Typically, you're having something like a pass interference penalty or a holding penalty. Of course, I said that, and now I've just jinxed every official listening to the show, so I apologize in advance. So
be ready week 1.
Yeah, be ready week 1. I guess that we did our episode on inadvertent whistles, and apparently there were a lot of inadvertent whistles that weekend. That was not our intent, folks. We promise. We're here to try to arm you with knowledge and set you up for success. So lastly, if we're going to extend periods, if there's a touchdown scored, When time expires, the period is extended for the try. There's another exception there concerning points, similar to the high school rule. So that's in Rule 832, if you want to take a look at that. So, and another subtlety in the college rule is the spiking of the ball. There's an improved ruling that's come out behind that in Rule 325. So basically, you have to have 3 seconds if the clock is running. If there's not 3 seconds and they try to spike the ball, they need to run a play. They can't spike it. That's just an interpretation that has come out of that rule. So now Ryan alluded to it earlier with the 10-second runoffs, which I think are interesting enough in themselves, and I'm kind of glad we don't have to worry about them in high school as much, but in the college world, it's something we have to face.
Right. We talked about in high school, we talked about everything being under 2 minutes. At the college level, the 10-second runoffs come into play when we hit the 1 minute mark. So whereas at high school, we communicate with each other on 2 minutes, in college, we'll communicate both to signal we're at 2 minutes or we're under 2 minutes. And then when we're under 1 minute as well, because at that 1 minute mark is when we have to add in the 10-second runoffs to think through. There's a few scenarios where 10-second runoffs might come into play, so we'll go through those individually. The first would be for an injury, and you can find that in Rule 335F. And the important thing to remember here, and it's going to carry through to the others as well, but the injury to a player has to be the only reason for stopping the clock, other than if there's a helmet or a teammate's helmet that comes off with less than 1 minute and a half. If the player injury is the only reason that the clock is stopped with less than 1 minute, then the opponent has the option of a 10-second runoff. Okay, it's not an automatic runoff. The opposing team has the option of a 10-second runoff. Now, if the injury is to a player of the defensive team, then we would set the play clock at 40 seconds. If it's to the offensive team, we would set it to 25 seconds. If the offended team, or I don't know if you would say offended team for the team with the non-injured player,
yeah,
but for the opponent of the team with the injured player, let's say that would be more appropriate there. If they accept the 10-second runoff, then the game clock is going to start on the referee's signal for the ready, right? And if there's no 10-second runoff, then the clock starts on the snap. So if they decline the runoff, the clock will start on the snap. Now, the team with the injured player, they can avoid the runoff. We often say, use the phrase buying out, so they can buy themselves out of that 10-second runoff if they have a timeout remaining and choose to use that timeout. However, in order to even consider any of this, it has to be an injury to the player or players of only one team. If there are injuries to opposing players, there's no option of a 10-second runoff there. Now, similarly to injuries, we'll talk about helmet that comes off through a play, not by a foul. So if we have a foul, then we might have a face mask, or you could have an unsportsmanlike conduct foul, something that would be, different here. But here, and thinking through a 10-second runoff, we're solely going to be thinking of a helmet that comes off through play. And when the helmet comes off, again, and that's the only reason that we stop the clock, okay? Other than, say, an injury to the player or their teammate, then the following conditions would apply. And you can find all of this in Rule 339B. All right, so here, the play clock, as with an injury, it'd be set at 25 seconds if this happens to a player on the offense, 40 seconds if it's to a player on the defense. If there's 1 minute or more remaining in either half, the game clock starts on the referee's signal. Okay, so that's over a minute that's left. Now, we might have a 10-second runoff if we're less than 1 minute and a half, and then the opponent can choose. Once again, the opponent has the option of a 10-second runoff, unless that helmet, again, comes off as a direct result of a foul, right? So if there's a face mask or some other reason that helmet gets ripped off, we're not thinking of a 10-second runoff. Only if it's one of those where it's just through whatever happens on the play, that helmet just pops off. That's when we're thinking of a runoff. If the opponent of the team with the player whose helmet comes off chooses the 10-second runoff, the game clock's going to start on the referee's signal. If they decline the runoff, the clock's going to start on the snap. And the team that has the player whose helmet comes off, they can once again choose to have the runoff avoid it if they use a team timeout, assuming that they have one left. As with injuries, if there's a helmet that comes off of players of both teams through play, then there's no option of a 10-second runoff. So that's 10-second runoffs for a helmet that comes off through play or for injuries. Michael, what about when we have a foul in the last minute?
So for the case of a foul, again, all of this, whether it's a helmet or an injury or foul, which we'll talk about, is all under 1 minute. And it has to be the specific reason we've stopped the clock. So Ryan, I think I like the helmet. Pretty simple. If we had a hands to the face or even a targeting or something like that, that's pretty cut and dry. Now, if we have something like a foul on one team, like we're going to talk about, and an injury on another team, like we don't have that option. Another kind of weird scenario is if we've achieved a first down, we've stopped the clock for the first down, and now we're going to address the foul, right? That this wouldn't apply. So it has to be specifically to the foul, the helmet, or the injury. So this can be found in 344 in the rule book. And real quickly, I'll just state if the game clock running with less than 1 minute remaining in either half before a change of possession, if either team commits a foul that causes the clock to stop immediately, the referee will subtract this 10 seconds from the game clock for the offended team. And then again, like Ryan talked about earlier, if the team wants the 10-second runoff, then we'll take the 10 seconds off. When the referee winds the clock, we'll start it. If they don't want the 10-second runoff, then it's going to start on the snap. And the way I kind of keep that in my mind is if they want to run off, they want the clock to run, right? If they don't want to run off, then it should stop and start on the snap. So just a quick list. These fouls that would stop this would be anything that prevents the snap. So like a false start or an encroachment, something like that, right? Any intentional grounding, an incomplete illegal forward pass. The last one concerning passes is a backwards pass thrown out of bounds to stop the clock. That is going to be a judgment call. I think Short Wing might be able to help with that. That's just going to be hard to determine that he threw it out of bounds to stop the clock. He might have just, missed his receiver. But otherwise, the catch-all is if there's any foul that has the intent of stopping the clock, which is going to be our judgment. So that's where those come into play. The 10-second runoff doesn't apply if the clock is not running. So if you have, play goes out of bounds or we have an incomplete pass and a foul, then the 10-second runoff doesn't come into play. And then again, kind of like we alluded to earlier, once we administer the penalty, we mark it off. We're going to get on, well, I guess not we, the referee is going to have to announce to the booth. So however you do that, that will need to subtract 10 seconds off the game clock. So, and again, as Ryan talked about with the helmet and the injury, this is where communication with your sideline comes into play, because the first thing to figure out is the offended team or the non-fouling team, I guess. Do they want to run off? That's the first thing you have to figure out. If they do or don't, then you have to go back to the other team, the fouling team in this case, and find out if they have any timeouts left, which, again, we should know, right? We're under that 1 minute mark. We talked about this. If they have any timeouts left, then they can utilize one and avoid that 10-second runoff. So there's a beautiful summary in all of this in your rule book, and Article 345 talks about that, or 335, rather, I apologize. Gives you a quick outline of injury, helmet, foul, and everybody's favorite instant replay. So that's something we might cover in a later episode, instant replay. Maybe they'll have that in the high school one day with instant replay. That'll be fun.
Well, at least in Indiana, we're not that close to that at this point.
No, not yet.
But yeah, I think that's just the important thing to keep in mind with the fouls. And you really emphasized it well, Michael, is that number one, the clock has to be running. Number two, it has to be a foul that causes the clock to stop. A false start, as you said, that causes the clock to stop. If there's a defender in the neutral zone or something that, I throw the flag, but we let the play continue, that's not a foul that stops the clock. Anything like that. So important things to keep in mind.
Your false start example, if you had a play, we're under a minute, say 58 seconds, the runner runs out of bounds, it's 2nd and 3, and we line up and we have a false start. There's no runoff there. The clock was already stopped. So all of this, it's really easy to get wrapped around the axle with all this. If the clock is stopped, which again, going back to pre-snap, something we covered early on, knowing the status of that clock and whether it's running or not is going to be crucial to getting this correct.
Right. Yeah, it's important to have all those things, all the timing things in mind too, as well, knowing when that clock is going to start, when it's not, so that if you do have to present information to the coaches, you're sharp on what's going on there. Now, there's some similar rules to some of the high school rules that we discussed. One of the rules, 343, deals with unfair clock tactics, which is somewhat comparable to the high school under 2-minute rule. The college rule book gives the referee broad authority as to the timing of the game. The referee can order the game clock or the play clock to start or stop when a team conserves or consumes time through unfair tactics. That includes starting the game clock on the snap if the foul is by the team ahead in the score. The rule gives a guideline to referees to consider invoking this rule when the game clock is under 5 minutes of each half. If the game clock is stopped to complete a penalty for a foul by the team that's ahead, or either team if the score is tied inside the last 2 minutes, it'll start on the snap at the option of the offended team. The game clock starts on the ready for play signal after Team A throws an illegal forward or backward pass to conserve time. So if a team is trying to do something unfair or illegal to conserve time, then the clock's going to start on the ready for play. And that's obviously outside of 1 minute. Otherwise, then the 10-second runoff might come into play there. But those are generally the rules that we have to keep in mind as we approach 2 minutes and 1 minute and a half. The mechanics are going to be somewhat similar to high school for the most part, because again, the rules are awfully similar, right? Michael talked earlier about hand signals for 2 minutes. There's a similar one that instead of having two fingers pointing down, you have one finger pointing down.
Rocket science.
Make it. If you're doing just one finger, make it the index finger, not something else. If
yes,
that might be picked up. So
yes,
one index finger on each hand pointing down, yelling 1 minute to the others on the crew, and that's just to communicate. You can use the radios as well. There's no harm in doing both a physical signal and using the radios to signal this. But like high school, everyone has to be mindful of this. Again, it's not just on the referee. It's not just on the calling official. All 7 officials, for us, 7 officials. If you use 8, then all 8 officials. If you use 6, then all 6 officials. However many officials are on that field, all those officials have to be mindful of what's going on and what the clock status is under 2 and under 1.
The last thing you want to do is I think if you're on a crew and you want to take responsibility for a particular rule and really own that rule and be locked in on that rule, that's great. And I highly encourage that. But the last thing you want to do is say, so-and-so will get that. They're really good at that rule. That they can handle that one. It's better to have 2 people know a particular rule or a mechanic, or in this case, just rule, than somehow it doesn't get covered, right? If everybody thinks somebody else should be doing it, then nobody's going to do it.
Right. Timing rules are so important, and knowing the clock status, both so you can communicate with each other, but communicate with coaches as well, so the sidelines know what's going on. That's so important that everybody has to be mindful of what's going on and what these rules are on the crew. I agree there are certain things, maybe a penalty enforcement or something, where you can have your crew expert or whatever, even though everybody is responsible for knowing it. But clock and timing status, I think, are those that everybody on the crew has to know and be mindful of.
I think one way I've heard it put is everybody's responsible for the rule book. You're assigned position to work that position. Right? So if you're a short wing or a deep wing or a back judge or a referee, right? Work the game like a referee. Work the game like an umpire. If you're an umpire, don't worry about what your head linesman is doing. I mean, if you see something or want to talk about something after the game, that's completely different. But work the game as an umpire. Work the game as a back judge. But as far as the rules are concerned, we all have to know the rules.
Right. But like high school, the mechanics are going to be the same. Try to relax. The game is the same in the last 2 minutes, last 1 minute of the half as it is the other 28 or 29 minutes. Like in high school, hustle, but don't hurry, right? When we're hurrying, that's when we're making mistakes. If you're trying to hurry to get the ball in or do certain things, then you end up dropping it or throwing a bad pass and you're wasting time by trying to hurry. So hustle, go, keep your pace steady throughout. Hustle, don't hurry. One difference here, to be mindful of is that as we approach halftime or we approach the end of the fourth quarter, those last 2 minutes, the umpire is starting to move sideline to sideline. So we're limiting the distance that we're throwing balls on ball mechanics. So we're hopefully limiting those opportunities. The ball should never hit the field, but this is one where we're trying to limit the possibility of that happening as well. Michael hit this at the high school level. You really want to keep an eye toward the coaches if we're in an area where there's either an obvious or a possible timeout coming. Because again, if they're calling the timeout, we want to give them the timeout and make sure that we're not having time run off or wasting time with them trying to get our attention or find us there.
Yeah, I think just whether it's high school, college, even the NFL, your football IQ is just so important, and we get that by getting snaps, right? Or hopefully listening to the show here has provided some insight just to approach things differently and try to learn about what you can just anticipate, right? Anticipate when you're studying. Maybe not anticipate when the play's happening because we don't want to over officiate, but just doing all the things you can off the field to prepare yourself to be on the field. That's kind of the message we're trying to drive home with tonight's show and just the podcast in general.
Right. Yeah. And finally, if there's a foul that occurs in the last 2 minutes or last 1 minute, a 10-second runoff might come into play under 1 minute, whether for a foul or for the helmet off or an injury, something along those lines. If you're not the calling official, you're not enforcing it, although they need to be mindful of that. If you have information that you can come in and give, make sure you come in and give the information. Don't save it for the locker room. Make sure we get it right out on the field. Make sure we know that when a possible 10-second runoff comes into play, and also know the timeout status of the team that's committing the foul, has the injured player, has the helmet off, so that we can make sure that they have the option to buy themselves out of that if timeouts remain. Right. There's a lot to think through as time's running down in the half. Again, I think the more that you study this, the more that you prepare for it, the more relaxed you're going to be and the better you're going to be at enforcing this and getting this right when those situations arise. When time's running out, I understand the natural inclination for the heart to beat a little bit faster, to pound a little bit harder. But if you're solid on this, you're going to be solid when these situations arise. And you're going to be solid whether there's 15 minutes left in the first quarter or there's 1 second left in the half. Now, that's what we're thinking through when there's 1 second left in the half, but unfortunately there's no time left in our podcast. So we'd like to thank you for joining us once again for another episode of Learn Your Stripes. As always, we're going to leave you with the play to consider.
Okay, with 12 seconds left in the fourth quarter, A is trailing 21-17. A has the ball second and goal at the B8, and A81 gets set while A27 is in motion. L throws a flag. A12 completes a pass to the B2 with 8 seconds on the clock at the time of the whistle. What is the foul? What is the enforcement? Down and distance? What's our clock status in high school and college?
We'll discuss that play at the start of our next episode. In the meantime, if you want to let us know what your ruling would be, or if you have any questions or feel we made a mistake, please email us at learnyourstripes@gmail.com. You can find us on your app of choice, or obtain episodes or an RSS link to directly download all episodes into your podcast app of choice at learnyourstripespodcast.com. Please also follow us on Facebook at Learn Your Stripes Podcast, on Instagram at the same name, and on Twitter at LYS_podcast. If you enjoy the show, please tell your friends and rate us 5 stars and leave a review on your app of choice. We'll see you back here soon. In the meantime, keep learning your stripes.